let's say no to the grant. And I will invite the lying Dr. Fauci to Boise State University, and we'll lock him up.
And hear the reaction. That's it. That's the tweet. Except that wasn't a tweet. It was a speech the lieutenant governor was giving this weekend in Coeur d'Alene at the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee Lincoln Day dinner. And threatening an American civil servant with imprisonment without due process, not very constitutional, I should say, wasn't all that Governor McGeachin said in her 11-minute speech over the weekend. Once again, she brought up the affordable housing protest taking place at the old Ada County Courthouse, the one right across the street from the state capitol building, calling it a complete lack of integrity in the law, end quote, and calling on the Idaho State Police to deal with it. Well, I guess ISP has, and I should say is, dealing with it, and they would like the lieutenant governor to leave it to them to continue dealing with it without help from her. Here's Joe Paris.
Over the weekend, Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin continued to speak out about the demonstration set up across the street from the Capitol building. Demonstrators tell KTVB that they're set up there to draw attention to the lack of affordable housing and available emergency shelter beds. Skeptics, including McGeachin, disagree, saying that this is about something else.
Liberal and former BLM activists are exploiting the homeless. They want you and I to pay for shelter with no rules.
That clip is from McGeachin's speech at the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee's Lincoln Day dinner over the weekend. But her involvement in the situation dates back a few weeks. Back on February 2nd, McGeachin sent a letter to the governor and attorney general about the demonstration at the old Ada County Courthouse. She writes that demonstrators are violating an Idaho code that prohibits camping on specific state property, and anyone violating that code, she says, is, quote, considered guilty of an infraction and required to remove all personal property from the area. She adds that Idaho Code gives the Department of Administration the authority to close an area if there is landscape destruction. The letter goes on to say that Idaho State Police have tried to work with the community on a solution, but to no avail. So she calls on Governor Little and Attorney General Lawrence Wasden to take action to enforce the Idaho Code she referenced. That same day, McGeachin took to social media to share her frustrations with the situation, saying the demonstration should not be protected by symbolic speech laws because they are breaking Idaho Code. McGeachin appears to also take credit for ISP troopers going through the demonstration to take contraband and clear trash. However, ISP says it's quite the opposite. 2 days later, February 4th, the Attorney General's office responded to McGeachin's letter saying, quote, "The purpose of my correspondence is to note how unhelpful your letter was in regard to the overall work the state has been doing in recent weeks on this very issue. Multiple state offices and agencies have collaborated in an attempt to rectify a delicate situation that requires a balance of complex legal matters involving state statutes, case law, and the First Amendment," end quote. The letter finishes saying that contrary to the assertion in McGeachin's letter, neither the Idaho Constitution nor Idaho Code provide the Attorney General with enforcement authority over the Capitol Mall grounds. That instead belongs to the Department of Administration and the Idaho State Police. The letter says that those entities continue to enforce Idaho law in a manner that is responsible, measured, and legally defensible should it be challenged in court. That same day, February 4th, McGeachin also heard back from the director of the Idaho State Police, Colonel Kedrick Wills. His letter acknowledges McGeachin's comments, saying, quote, in which she was critical of Idaho State Police's response to the situation at the Capitol Annex. "I am also aware of recent statements you have made on social media," Wills wrote. He goes on to say that troopers previously briefed McGeachin on the situation at her request. At that time, they told her the situation is highly complex. ISP is working closely with the stakeholders to execute a deliberate and strategic response, they say, that protects the rights and interests of the public as well as those present. The letter finishes by saying, quote, "Please be cognizant that your public statements on this matter may be counterproductive to police efforts and subject the state to unnecessary legal risk." Despite the letters to McGeachin this past weekend, she doubled down on her idea to simply clear the demonstration, despite clear legal issues.
It can be corrected through administrative rule. To our Attorney General, I invite you to come to my office, and I will be happy to share this idea with you, how we can, through administrative rule, clean up Tent City.
Okay, so she says through an administrative rule she could clear this up, but as you said, ISP says this is much more complicated than that. Where does it stand? I mean, we know that they can move them around that property so they don't destroy the property. So where does this look like right now, Joe?
Well, it really looks like the same way it has over the last few weeks. And Brian, as you just alluded to, Idaho State Police did actually move some tents and some other things to a different part of the lawn at the Ada County Courthouse, the old Ada County Courthouse, I should say, because of some concerns of damage to the grass there. So ISP is monitoring the situation, but Brian, is very tricky because this is a free speech issue. And as we heard from ISP in the Attorney General's office, they have to treat it very quickly as not to infringe on someone's First Amendment right. The problem here is there's some confusion between what a demonstration and what a camp out looks like. One thing I'll mention, if, for example, camping, technically you can't have your tent staked into the ground. You'll see in the video there that they have pulley systems to keep the tents up so that they're not camping. So it's an intricate situation.
Yeah, and we'll see if this is the last we hear from Lieutenant Governor on this situation. Thanks, Joe.